So we're ready to start on the second half of our local government presentations, and I forgot to ask something at the onset. If you're an attorney or a lawyer, would you raise your hand, please? Okay, well, some of you haven't self-identified. You guys are okay. But I'm happy to introduce speakers from Broomfield. For those of you who've been following, Broomfield has been engaged in a community process and extensive negotiations with extraction to accommodate some pretty large-scale drilling that's going to occur in their area, in their growth area. A lot of citizen input, and it's pretty interesting for those of us on the Front Range. We're all watching each other to see who's doing what, and Broomfield right now is the poster child for what's next for everybody. Our speakers this morning, I'd like to introduce Tami Yellico, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Broomfield. That's an awesome job title. How do you live up to that?
Not easily.
And Tami will talk a little bit about the comprehensive plan process, which is, you know, innovative, I thought, to include oil and gas into that visioning for the future. And Elizabeth Paranhos, a founding member of Innovation Partners, who's worked on the memorandum of agreement and also some of the air quality regulations, which really both of these things are kind of groundbreaking, so we're all anxious to see how it's going to work. Tami?
Sure. This is my mic.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. I know local governments all have different perspectives, East Slope, West Slope, all of that. I think sometimes the royalties and property taxes off of oil and gas are very important for communities. On the Front Range, I think there's a different story going on, and it's a story about more oil and gas moving closer to people. So what happened in Broomfield, as by way of background, is in 2016 we heard from the operator that they were going to drill over 140 wells, and very near thousands of people who live in Anthem Highlands and Anthem Ranch in Broomfield, if you know it, and what the wildgrass area of the city and county of Broomfield. And so we had a citizen outcry, and we had a lot of citizens come to several public meetings. And so our next step was to do a meeting at the First Bank Center in Broomfield on Highway 36, and we had over 1,000 folks in person and online who came to hear from the operator and the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and the Colorado Department of Health and Employment to explain the project and the safety mitigation factors that they had already built into the operations. But after that, our citizens were still very, very concerned about the size of these well pads and the proximity to that thousands of residents, literally. So our city council, very wisely, and two of them are here in the audience today, decided to take a look at what is on the screen right now, which was a recommendation from the Governor's Oil and Gas Task Force that took place in 2015, and this one I will read to you. The task force did say that one of the purposes was to reduce the impacts and conflicts with communities, including siting tools to locate facilities away from residential areas when feasible, and creating incentives for early resolution of concerns about siting in urban communities by providing local government with opportunity to participate in siting facilities before an operator finalizes locations. So that was a task force recommendation, and what our city council did with that was create a 14-member citizen committee. This was not really just any committee. The city council handpicked these folks. They included geologists, an operator, environmentalists, a couple of attorneys. They had a range of backgrounds, and they met from March, I believe, of 2017, yes, to August, and came up with a comprehensive plan chapter on oil and gas. So, let's see here, if I can move this forward. So they had a number of presentations from a variety of consultants, including pipeline presentations from FSMA and the PUC. They had soil and groundwater testing experts, air quality experts spoke to the committee. They broke themselves into 4 subcommittees: a legal subcommittee, a planning subcommittee, and a community impact subcommittee. And overall, the committee of 14 members met 4 hours a week and for about 6 months. The specific recommendations that are in our oil and gas comprehensive plan chapter include baseline measurements of soils and air and noise, and then measurements during each phase of drilling, including hydraulic fracturing and then during operations. We have in our operator agreement, which I will get to just a minute, the requirement that pipelines be mapped and those maps be provided to us. We enhanced inspections requiring leak detection programs. 98% VOC production is in this chapter, 98% reduction in VOC production. We established noise standards for residential areas in this chapter. And also, key to this chapter is an alternative site analysis. So one of the subcommittees of our chapter wanted to do an alternative site analysis program. And what they did was, this is a map of all of Broomfield, and it indicates where drilling might occur and where, in the spacing units that were of concern, and where water bodies or planned water bodies exist. And you can see from this map that all the yellow is residential housing, and the drill sites were planned from just to your left of that large planned water body and then farther east. So that's where 140 wells were going on a number of well pads. But the planning subcommittee of the Oil and Gas Committee developed an alternative site analysis, and they looked at all possible locations they thought that these wells pads could be moved. And they looked at 26 different locations. They developed this weighting criteria. I realize this slide is a little bit difficult to read, but the blue indicates that the factors that weighted most heavily for our residents were distance from residential properties, residential density, distance from surface water, visual impact, and the surrounding land uses. So they have this weighted criteria that they applied to each of their 26 proposed sites. So this is kind of how that alternative site analysis turned out for the proposed extraction wells. The extraction wells are in the column on your right, as they had proposed them. You can see that the low pad rated lowest in red in terms of proximity to people, proximity to water bodies or proposed water bodies. The Sheridan pad was not much better in the amber. Coyote Trails is a pad where some of the wells planned for Broomfield were moved. And then the United and Huron pads ranked the highest in terms of these weighting factors that our planning subcommittee went through. So this is the spacing units that extraction has to drill. There's some creststone there in yellow and orange, but basically they have spacing units in the purple, pink, green sections of this map. So it shows you that it's right in the middle of basically a lot of residential development in Broomfield. Oops, that's the wrong way. So here's where we ended up with extraction. This is the current status of the well pads. And I want to talk about this slide for just a minute. One of the things in the chapter was a suggested setback provision. Of course, a comprehensive oil and gas plan chapter is merely a guideline. It is a roadmap for where we think oil and gas should go. It is not a regulation, although we are adopting new regulations in the near future. But one topic addressed in the chapter is setbacks, and the committee recommended 1,320-foot setback where there was an 18-well pad or more from residential properties. It seems like a lot, but there were thousands of people up north, as you can see it there, and they wanted that distance. Then for smaller pads of, let's see, 2 to 8 wells, it could be 750 feet from residences with a 500-foot distance between well pads. So going then from your left to right, the first pad is the Livingston pad. That will now have 19 wells on it. It was going to have an additional 15, but Broomfield traded mineral interests to remove 15 wells from that pad. So in the end, that pad will have 19 wells. Then the next two pads, I believe, have 8 wells each. They're the northwest pads, and they're 500 feet between the pads and over 750 feet away from homes. The homes to the south of those pads are unincorporated Adams County residents. And we are working with Adams County. They have concerns about this, and we understand those concerns, and we continue to meet with them on that. We understand that the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission may have public hearings on those pads in particular. The next pad to your right is what is called the United pad now, and I believe it has over 18 wells on it, and it will be 1,320 feet from occupied buildings. Then if you move farther to the right, Extraction purchased the property on the far right, and they're putting 2 well pads on there, and those are 500 feet apart too. I believe those are 8 wells apiece, plus some additional equipment on that well site, but they own that property right there. So moving along quickly, because I know we don't have much time. One thing the Oil and Gas Committee concluded was we should not only improve our regulations, but we should work with the state to improve regulations. And we are always looking for local government partners to help us go to the state and talk about regulations that are important to local governments. So this is the list that the committee came up with, not unreasonable in Broomfield's eyes, but electric power generation on well sites so that you limit the fumes, diesel, truck traffic, noise limitations for pads that are near residential areas. These pads would have fell under an industrial decibel level of COGCC's rules, and Extraction agreed to a residential level of noise control in the agreement, essentially. No on-site storage tanks. These facilities with Extraction will be limited when they're in operation to just the wellheads and the separators, as we understand it. And there'll be 3 pipelines going off of all of the well sites that will take away oil, gas, and produced water. We'd like to revisit setbacks for highly populated areas with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. Closed-loop systems, we think that's something that the industry does already with 98% hydrocarbon control and should be in a rule. More routine testing and monitoring of new and plugged-in abandoned wells, and increased financial assurances. We believe that insurance currently required by the COGCC is minimal and should be increased. More frequent water quality monitoring in the greater Wattenberg area. The greater Wattenberg area extends down into a lot of heavily populated areas, and some of the folks in Adams County in particular are on well water. And then this more rigorous site analysis that I talked to you about, where we can look at alternative sites, talk to the operator early on in the process, and see if other locations might be farther from residential properties. So this is my last slide, and I'll hurry up, but the kind of key points from the final Extraction Broomfield operator agreement. So our comprehensive plan committee presented this chapter of recommendations to our city council in August, and it was adopted August 24th. And then council told us to negotiate with the extraction at that point, and we signed an agreement in October. And so we went from 10 well sites to 6 well sites. We went from 139 wells to 84 wells. Extraction has agreed to plug and abandon 42 old wells in Broomfield, Adams County, and Weld County. This is really important, I think, to everyone, is to make this ask, because obviously old equipment is not as safe, does emit more, and so I think old equipment can be removed when there are new spacing units and new well sites. There are 57 best management practices that we asked to be put on the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission permits, and you can read those there, including the closed loop system, containment berms, air modeling, quiet drilling technology, the setback requirements which they met, and minimal pad equipment after completion. Again, these are just going to be the wellheads and the separators. And all of the oil, gas, and produced water will go into pipelines once they're online. Extraction also dedicated 39 acres of open space to Broomfield on the far right site that they purchased. They gave us $650,000 for leasing our open lands up against the Northwest Parkway. They also are we are negotiating with them basically on comprehensive drilling plans. There are 28 plans, and they cover the areas listed there. Our citizens are most, I think, concerned about emergency response, air quality, and risk analysis for these well sites, because they are still in the proximity of so many citizens on the Front Range. The extraction has agreed to give us as-built maps of pipelines and flow lines. They've offered, in the agreement, they are required to have $100 million in general liability insurance. They have also agreed to environmental liability insurance. And on these slides, I do have links to both our comprehensive plan chapter and the extraction agreement. So that's where Broomfield's been in the last year, and now I'll give it over to Elizabeth Paranhos.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. So I'm just going to touch on the authority that local governments have to enact local, maybe I'll use this, ordinances that are more protective of air quality than what the Air Quality Control Commission has promulgated with respect to emission control regulations, and then talk a little bit about what Broomfield has done to protect air quality. So just at a high level, let's see if I can make this work. There we go. Local governments have a couple different tools in their toolbox to protect air quality. One is to enact their own ordinances or resolutions that, pursuant to authority that has been granted to them from the legislature in the Air Pollution Control Act, can be more restrictive, more stringent than emission control regulations that have been promulgated by the Air Quality Control Commission. They also separately have authority, as you've heard from Tami, to negotiate operator agreements and include emission control requirements and air monitoring requirements, air modeling requirements in those operator agreements. So, whoops, sorry about that. The particular statute that I'm talking about is Colorado Revised Statute 257128, and you see the language here on the screen, and that, as I said, provides explicit authority for local governments to enact their own ordinances or resolutions that can contain emission control regulations that are more stringent than those promulgated by the Air Quality Control Commission. There are a few requirements if a local government chooses to utilize this authority that they need to comply with, and those are up on the screen. In particular, the legislature has encouraged local governments to coordinate their local ordinances with the Air Quality Control Commission, and in particular to include those requirements in the SIP, which is the State Implementation Plan, to the extent that that would be applicable. So, for example, a local government that is in an ozone non-attainment area, such as Broomfield, would be encouraged to coordinate with the state to incorporate their ordinance into the State Implementation Plan. There's also some additional requirements and restrictions. One is an exception with respect to a local ordinance that controls hazardous air pollutants, and that includes requirements that are more restrictive than what the state has adopted, although there is a savings clause to the extent that the local government adopts those more restrictive HAP requirements under another authority, a land use authority, for example. So using that authority, back in 2012, Broomfield revised its its oil and gas ordinance, and included a number of air quality measures that at the time were more protective of air quality than what the Air Quality Control Commission had promulgated. And Broomfield is currently in the process of updating that particular ordinance. And again, the draft rules that are available currently on the Broomfield website include a number of specific emission control requirements that go beyond what the Air Quality Control Commission has promulgated. So one example is a requirement to conduct more frequent leak detection inspections. The state has a tiered program, and under the Broomfield program, operators may be required to conduct more frequent inspections for gas leaks at their facilities than what would otherwise apply under the state rules. The other tool that local governments have at their disposal and that Broomfield has utilized is to enter into an operator agreement with a particular operator. So as you've heard from Tami, pursuant to the agreement with Extraction, Broomfield has required a number of air quality control measures that Extraction has agreed to. One of them is to use tankless facilities, so all of the new facilities will have most of the production equipment located elsewhere than the well pad. There's a number of other requirements in the agreement. Air quality monitoring is one of the requirements, and Extraction has agreed to provide some funding to Broomfield to pay for monitoring. And Broomfield is currently in the process of obtaining proposals from a number of various vendors that could both install and operate continuous air quality monitors at the 4 well pads that Tami talked to you about tonight. I think I'm going to stop there because we only have 4 minutes left for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, we're available to answer them.
All right, I know you're all dying to get into the Broomfield questions.
Yes, I guess it's for Tami. So your 8-well pad, you agreed on a, 800-foot setback?
750.
Okay, so how does that compare with the COGCC rules, which are 500 to 1,000-foot buffer for high-density subdivisions or something like that? How does that compare? It sounds like it's pretty close to what the COGCC rules are at, which is 500 to 1,000-foot buffer, right?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm not an expert on COGCC rules. That might be the requirement for urban mitigation areas. I don't think this qualified for that category, but all of our setbacks do exceed the 500-foot setback, and that's where originally these well pads started, where some of them were closer. So, and they were not closer than the 500, obviously, but they were moved back either 1,320 feet from Anthem residents or 750 feet or more from other residents.
Tami, this is your cousin Jim Yellico.
Hi, Jim.
I'm over
Where
here
are
to the left.
Hi, Jim.
Hi. You said you did a great job. I can't wait to tell my mom.
Hi.
Yeah, so we'll get together later.
It's good to see you.
Plan the reunion.
Yeah.
That was really all I wanted to say, but I did have a question about private property rights.
Hi, Jim.
I'm a big believer in the property right thing. So when you were making rules for well pads for the industry where they can put them, what if I have a field and then I wanted to develop my field? Do I have to comply to the setback that you that has been put in place that's been set on the operator, or can I get a variance for that and make everybody sign a waiver, or what?
Well, again, these setbacks were only in our comprehensive plan chapter, and so again, those are guidelines or recommendations. Our rules are being written differently, and we negotiated these setbacks with Extraction, and they willingly came to the table and talked with us about setbacks that were greater than the 500 feet. So I think under our new regulations, we are also taking, for the use permit approach and for the operator agreement, a negotiated approach. But it's a heavy negotiation because we live in a very urban area on the Front Range. So that's the answer. Hi, Jim.
John Justman, Mesa County Commissioner. So who owns the mineral rights? Is it the federal government or what?
Well,
Or is
actually,
it barium? Is it some of it's private or?
yeah, we're doing some mineral title work right now on a lot of our open space. We try to take the mineral rights when we purchase open space. But for example, on the Livingston pad, we owned most, if not 100% of the minerals in those sections, that section. And so we were able to trade some of our minerals to reduce the well count on that one well site. So we do own a lot of the minerals on the areas where these well sites are going, except for the interchange pads.
You mean the town of Broomfield or the county of Broomfield?
The city and county of Broomfield. We always, when we purchase open space, try to get any minerals that the owner has too.
Okay.
Yeah. I have
One quick question, and then we're going to go to our next session. I apologize.
I noticed your regulations indicated noise mitigation. I was curious if you could give more elaboration on the types of regulation you're asking for or what you're getting from operators.
Right. Well, again, it's comprehensive plan, so those are only recommendations on noise mitigations. But for example, Extraction agreed to the residential decibel levels that are in the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission rules, but it's at 1,000 feet that we're measuring those. So we're measuring those at 1,000 feet. These well sites are also along the Northwest Parkway, which is a heavily trafficked area. So we're going to do baseline noise measuring and then measuring throughout the production and operations. But we negotiated to the residential decibel levels.